Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Jerry Lynch and John O'Sullivan to the show. Gentlemen, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks, Dan. It's awesome to be here again. Great to see you. Good to see your face. It's been a while.
Thank you, Dan. Been looking forward to this for way too long.
Yeah. Well, you are both returning guests, and it's been a while since John. I think it's been slightly longer between us, and Jerry. I think you came on last year. The prolific writer that you are. It seems to be a book a year with
a book a year.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Great goal to have. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about a new book that you've co-authored called The Champion Teammate. But before we do that, you are both returning guests, and most people tuning in will know who both of you are. But let's do some introductions. Dr. Jerry Lynch, sir, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a dad of 4 children. That might be the most important thing to understand. Without that, I couldn't do my work. Believe me. They teach me everything I need to know about myself, but I don't want to know. But I've been at this work being making sports and athletics a better world for 45 years, and I've learned a lot. I've been so blessed to be in the company of iconic coaches, Hall of Fame coaches, champion teammates. We've accumulated over 118 championship teams, and I say that only because can you imagine how much any one of us would learn if we were exposed to that many championship teams? I know I've taught them some things, but they've taught me more than I could ever give back. And that just fills me up. And that's why I'm writing a book a year. And that's why I have all of this enthusiasm and important passion and love for making sports a better world. So that's the essence of, and I'm not ready to retire, contrary to what a lot of people think. I want to rewire and refire and come up about a way to deliver my work in a way that works at my age and my time of life. And it seems to be working pretty well, thanks to John.
And I even love your reference to Hebbian neurology in What Fires Together, Wires Together. Great stuff. Jerry, it's an honour and a pleasure to have you on, and we all love your work, and keep going with it. It's brilliant, and looking forward to unpacking this book today. John O'Sullivan, great to see you again. It's been some time. Great to have you back on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, man. Well, Jerry's always one-upping me. He writes more books than I do. He has 4 kids. I only have 2. So it's always a competition with him. But
healthy competition.
Healthy competition. So, I mean, I was on a couple of years ago, still running this organization, Changing the Game project. And obviously the world has undergone some crazy changes then, but it's normalizing quite a bit now, and so we're back in the locker room with some collegiate teams and back doing some live coach and parent education in from everything from university athletic departments to high schools and clubs and everything in between, and also keep my toe dipped in the water of coaching here in my hometown of Bend, Oregon. So I have a group of 48 and 9-year-olds that I work with twice a week, which is controlled mayhem, sometimes uncontrolled mayhem, and also coaching under 17 boys team as well. So a little less mayhem, a little more management on that one. But yeah, it's, as Jerry said, it's really fun because what we both do is we don't just write about things or talk about stuff. We're out there working with athletes, working with coaches, working with teams, and implementing the stuff that we learn from all these great coaches on our Way of Champions podcast or through the work we do with teams. And as you know very well, Dan, sometimes you throw it and it sticks, and sometimes it's a complete disaster. But it's really fun to be out there and, just currently on a daily basis working with young athletes, working with collegiate university athletes, future pros, whatever it is, trying to help them achieve their very best. So it's quite the journey for sure.
And we spoke about healthy competition earlier, but your relationship is very much a competition, collaboration. I mean, how long have you guys been collaborating for now? I know you started the Changing the Game project together, and you've got a podcast together, which I've been honoured and delighted to be on. In fact, I think I was on one of your first ones. So how long has this relationship been going for, and how did it start in the first place?
I mean, Jerry, you just like it was a random phone call when I wrote my first book. And it was probably around, so I'd started Changing the Game project, and it was probably around 2014 or so. Jerry first called me and said, I read your book, and, it turned out, we're both New Yorkers, and both our dads were New York City firefighters, which means you are sort of raised in part of a very interesting brotherhood of people when you talk about teams and teamwork. And I happened to be traveling to Colorado soon after that phone call, and Jerry was spending some of his time then in Boulder, Colorado. And so on my trip, I took a day to go up to Boulder and meet Jerry in person, and he took me on a hike. And on this hike, we sort of hashed out some work we could do together. And Dan, me, like I'd been writing about, creating this right environment and treating young athletes the right way and coaching a certain way. And I met Jerry, who had been advocating that. And at that point, had, 30 plus NCAA titles and, professional, teams that have done that. And I said, there's sort of the proof that this works. I'm saying this in theory, or I've seen it with youth teams. Jerry's seeing it at the top level of university or professional sports. I said, how can we work together? And we hashed out this idea for doing a conference together, because Jerry's like, I have all this material, I just don't know how to get any people there. I'm like, well, I can do that part of it, and so we hashed out the idea, and we're on this wonderful hike that's overlooking Boulder. And I said to Jerry, what's the name of this hike? And he's like, I don't know what the name of the hike is. So we're hiking back down, and we see the name of the trail, and it's called Mount Sanitas, Sanitas. And I'm like, that's an interesting Latin word there. I wonder what that means. So we drive back into town where we get a phone signal. I look up the word Sanitas, and it says, soundness of mind, soundness of body, thoroughness of style. I'm like, holy cow, that's what we just spent 2 hours talking about. So that was the birth of our conference together. And then a couple of years later came the podcast, which is now 6 years in. And we still haven't missed a week.
Amazing story, Jerry.
Yeah, well, I have a different version of that, but it'll take too long to tell. But essentially, I told John, I don't know how to do those things. That's not my wheelhouse. I said, I'm used to people just calling and saying, will you come and talk with us? And then I go and talk and come home and get a check, and it's the end of the game, But John had all this enthusiasm for putting on this show and this idea of coming together. And I was ready. And that's why I reached out to you, John. That's why, I was looking for 10 years. I was looking for someone I could partner with, someone I can collaborate with, to take some of the burden off of myself, but also to expand my own way of thinking and to learn from somebody else, because I kind of felt I was in a rut. I was good at what I did, and I could do it with without, with a blindfold on. But when John came in, he opened me up to so many other possibilities. I mean, just running a conference together and what a monumental task that is. But also, I've learned so much from from this collaboration. And one of the benefits, of course, is we become good teammates, and we use that friendship and that connection and that caring to write this book, which perhaps is one of the easiest books John will ever write, and one of the fastest ones I've ever written, and so maybe that's a lead into this book in and of itself.
Well, it's a lovely segue you've offered us there, so thank you for that. And I was going to ask, actually, you've worked together for a long time, and I know you've written books separately, plenty of them. I believe this is the first one you've collaborated
Correct.
on. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but why this one? Why the champion teammate? What was it about this topic, this particular project, that you felt, yeah, this is the first one we want to write about together?
Um, we hashed out the idea a couple years ago of, we should do this. And, one of the things, Dan, and I don't know if you see this in your work, but certainly on the university level in the US with a lot of these teams, they go on summer break, and a lot of the coaches say, how do we stay connected and collaborating? Let's read a book together. And so a lot of them look for books to read. And there's a lot of great books out there that Jerry's recommended and I've recommended to teams hey, let's do this together and work through a book and get better. And so, but we always felt like, the books would hit parts of it, but not all of it. And we're like, well, why don't we just write the book that we would want our teams to read in the summer? Right. And then come back together. Or it's the book that, a team can go through week by week, take 15 minutes a week out of your practice schedule, read a 3-page chapter. It's got a story, it's got a lesson behind it. And then it has discussion questions that you can sit there and talk about as a team. Just get everyone on the same page in these different areas of the book. And so we had hashed it out. We didn't, just the idea sat in a folder in my email account. And then sort of in the fall of 2022, watching the World Cup, there's lots of different ideas around, what's a good teammate, what's a bad teammate, which teams are being successful, which ones aren't. And we decided, like, this is a good time. I wasn't going on the road for quite a while. Jerry wasn't, and said, this is a really kind of a nice quiet time to do some writing. So we agreed to do it. And then, I just went back to my normal life. And about 6 days later, Jerry sends me an email like, here's 50 pages. And I'm like, oh, geez, I better start because I haven't written a single word yet. And so it's this perfect example of teammates collaborating. Like when you're not having a great day and your teammate picks you up and makes you feel a little more accountable to get some work done. It worked out great. So that's how it got going. And then I think like Jerry said, it was a really easy and fun book to write because it just kind of came out of us. And we had outlined what the chapters might be. And then as we were writing, Jerry would say, hey, I just wrote this other chapter. It wasn't on our list, but it seemed to fit. And that's how it all kind of came out and came together.
What I'm hearing you say there, John, is having a Jerry who writes this very, very quickly is better than having a bullying publisher who tries to get you to write these things very quickly.
Well, exactly, because I don't feel accountable to a publisher.
Yeah, that's fair.
But it's like having a teammate who's out there doing the fitness and you're just standing on the sideline doing nothing. You can only stand there for so long before you feel like an idiot. So,
well, what I found really most interesting, and I think the listeners need to hear this loud and clearly, is being a good teammate doesn't guarantee any outcomes or results. But you get the outcomes and results by being a good teammate. So I didn't go into this project because I needed another book. I went into this project, and John, whether I've said this to you or not, we could work together on the stage. We can go out there in the public and do our work and work with teams and coaches. But it requires a special level of cooperation, connection, caring to write a book together. And the truth of it is, how many co-authors write the second book together? You don't find many people doing that. And there's a reason, is because they're not good teammates. It wasn't a good experience for them. So writing this book, saying yes to John about this book, he approached me about the topic and I said, yeah, it's a wonderful topic. There's very few things out there that are written really well that can help you implement what it is to be a good teammate. I saw it as a challenge for me to write another book with someone who claims to be a teammate, and I claim to be a teammate, and this is going to test our relationship. I knew this going in, 100%. But I wanted to take that challenge, and I wanted to take it on. And I thought that if we can complete this book and do a good job using all of the conceptual material in this book, that it would be a great book. So the outcome is a great book, but it's not a great book because we wrote a great book. It's a great book because we were great teammates together. You know, we went back and forth. We were patient with each other. We were giving to each other. We carried our hose. You know, we swept the shed. We did all the things we're talking about in this book together. And when that happens to people in life, whether it's a husband and wife or a partnership of any kind, we do our work together. The outcomes usually are pretty awesome. And so this book is a representation of who we are, not what we do.
Well, being a geeky sports psychologist, Jerry, that sounds like goal achievement theory to me there. You're task focused, team oriented, letting the outcome take care of itself. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, absolutely fantastic. And you neatly segregate this book into 3 simple sections. Section 1 is connect, section 2 is compete, and then lead. But in the introduction, you propose that we begin within. Why do you start there? What do you mean? I mean, this is about being a great teammate. Surely this is a social endeavor. What do you mean by begin within?
I mean, it's an inner journey. You know, there are a lot of external things we can do, but you have to know yourself. You have to get to understand that this is an opportunity to grow and be the best version of yourself as a person, because we're all human beings. And that's what we love about each other. We don't love that you scored the winning basket. Yeah, we love it. We won the championship. But really what we love at the end of the day, we love the fact that you're my buddy, that we're really connected. We care about each other. We love each other, and we'll do anything for each other on a Saturday afternoon on that field, but we'll do anything for each other in life. And in order to go there, you know, we have to stop looking at outcomes and results. We have to start looking at the inner game. And the inner game is the emotional, spiritual, personal development as a human being. And in this book, we outline and help implement all of the qualities that we've learned from all those championship teams, from all of those wonderful athletes that we've been exposed to. What's really required to be, and I emphasize the word be, not becoming, but to be right now today, that person that who's looked inside and really understands like your spirit, your soul, who you are, and how is that going to impact each other. One of the things I love about you, Dan, is you're authentic, you're genuine, you're vulnerable, you're well prepared. These are all inner qualities, and because of that, I'm willing to go to the distance with you. Whatever you ask me today, I'm going to stick by your side, and I'm going to make it happen in the best way I can. So that's a wonderful approach that we have discovered, and the great coaches like a Steve Kerr, Phil Jackson, Cindy Timshell, Tara Vanderveer, the list goes on, and they all feel the same way. You start from the inside out.
You've thrown down some big names there, Jerry, and coming to you, John. I mean, you are interviewing these kind of people and working alongside these kind of people that Jerry has done for the last 40 years on a weekly basis on your podcast. Do you concur with everything that Jerry said there, that really this does start with the inner game, if you like, the relationships, collaboration, cooperation, words we've used already. Being a great teammate starts from within in each individual.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this idea, as we were writing the book, we were being very careful about language to not say becoming a great teammate, right? That it starts with sort of this decision to just be a certain way. And I think Jerry and I, there was an American football coach named Bill Walsh, very famous Super Bowl winner. And he says, champions act like champions before they become champions. Right. and this is something we're always trying to get across to our teams, is that you don't wait to win something, right, or to have success to then be something. You have to be that, years out, months out, weeks out, with the faith that if we do the right things over and over, the results, the scoreboard, the outcomes take care of themselves. And so we're very careful with this language to never say, you're going to become a great teammate. Like, no, it's a decision that you make to start acting and thinking and being a certain way. And then you just do that day after day, and you hold others accountable for doing the same. And I think the great coaches know this, and they teach it. And certainly, very well from your own work, those at the highest level of sport in the public eye, those athletes and those coaches face a different level of scrutiny and a different level of people poking holes in what they're trying to do or how they're trying to be, more so than kids at a university level, more so than kids at a high school level or a youth level. But the lessons in this book and being a great teammate is something that we can and should start teaching people very young. We just assume that, they'll know this, they'll figure it out. But I mean, I talk about the things in this book with my 8 and 9-year-olds that I coach. We just spend a couple minutes and we talk about one of these principles, and then, and how it's going to apply to practice today. And then at the end of practice, I let the kids give each other, does anyone want to give one of your teammates a shout out for being selfless today or being a hard worker today or something like that? And they love that. They love to give each other shout outs. They love to get recognized, and they love to recognize others. As we say in the back cover of the book, the first line is, you're going to be part of teams the rest of your life, right? Your family, your church, your community, your work team, whatever it is. Why aren't we more intentional about teaching people how to do that well? And so we wanted to write a book that would do that.
You're surely not injecting psychosocial skills and life skills into your activities and sessions, John. Surely.
I don't have time for that, Dan. I have to teach. I have to teach passing technique and tactics and periodization.
Love the sarcasm. Love the sarcasm.
I might read a few of your LinkedIn posts on a daily basis.
Wow. We're all trying to change that landscape, aren't we? And
yeah.
Look, what I'd love to do here is, there's so much fantastic practical advice throughout this book, enveloped in stories, enveloped in experience, the experiences you've had and others have had. And so I'd like to make my way through each part with you both, and perhaps pick out allow you both to pick out some of the whether it's tools, techniques, philosophies, concepts that you feel are they're all really important, but are perhaps the highlights for you of each part, each section. Let's begin at the beginning. Let's start with part 1, connect, winning the relationship game. So, I mean, John, if we could perhaps start with yourself first. When you think of this, when you think of part 1, connect, winning the relationship game, what are some of the lessons, the ideas, the philosophies, the techniques that stand out for you in this first part?
Sure. And I think it's important to preface this with saying, when we laid out the different things we wanted to write, we didn't know how it was going to break out, but it sort of naturally broke out this way of like, these things kind of fit in these different categories. And then, we took we started with 20 topics and ended, I think, with 27. And, we'd be like, Jerry, like, well, I'm going to write these, and these. And I'm like, darn it, I wanted to write that one or whatever, but I'll talk about, one of the chapters that I wrote in that section, not steal Jerry's thunder, which was this idea of, great teams and great teammates have standards and not rules. Right. And so, a rule is a boundary to be tested, something to be pushed, something to be broken. And a standard is something to be aspired to. And I think as a coach, right, you never want more rules than you're willing to hold people accountable for. And some of the best programs, they really just don't have a lot of rules. They have standards like, think of your team first, live a healthy lifestyle, things like this that you can aspire to. And then it's not a coach or team captains walking around being a policeman all the time, making sure people do stuff. Right. And so a lot of coaches come to us and they want to make all these rules to modify and force behavior. And I'm always like, well, why don't you set some standards and let your players weigh in on what those standards might be? Because if they weigh in, they're more likely to buy in to what you're asking them to do. And then just set a few high standards. But then as the coach, you're ultimately you're holding people accountable. Right. And as and when your program gets to a great point, well, then, you know what? A lot of it doesn't even get to the coach because the team leadership, the upperclassmen in a university, the senior players, they hold everyone accountable. They are just saying, we got this, and here's this piece. And as the coach, you're just dealing with the individual athletes who won't get on board. You're recruiting and trying to bring in the right people into your culture and things like that. So, I feel like that was a really good one that a lot of coaches don't think about, that they just want to make rules to govern behavior. And you're far better off with really high standards because you know what, if you make rules, let's talk about basketball and Phil Jackson and the Chicago Bulls. They made a decision. Dennis Rodman will help us win titles. If you make rules, Dennis Rodman will break rules. Right. But if we have standards, Dennis, just do your best that Dennis can to live up to this standard. and we will as a team understand that you're Dennis Rodman, but you're going to help us win. Then let's do that, and I think that's just a really important thing because when you make rules, you end up having to enforce them. And sometimes it's not super helpful for the athlete or for your team.
It's really interesting because you mentioned my daily LinkedIn posts, John, and I regaled in writing a lot about Dennis Rodman, having watched The Last Dance and wrote a few pieces on that, and really enjoyed that notion that a coach has to be ready to create an environment that allows for a Dennis Rodman type character, somebody who you might consider being low conscientious but high openness. And so I think he's a fascinating character. And speaking to what you're saying, it made me think, geeking out a little bit here from a neurological perspective, if you think of the brain from a very crude perspective of working away from or towards, what I love about your chapter here, setting standards and not rules, is the notion of rules seems to be synonymous of working away from. I have to, I can't break these rules. I'm not allowed to break these rules. Whereas standards has more of a behavioral approach feel, a working towards feel. So no question, John, but it just made me think of, the brain in many respects and what might feel more comfortable for an athlete and what might inspire an athlete more essentially.
Right. And I mean, just before Jerry jumps in, right, like just the perfect current example that when we're recording this would be like Jack Grealish winning the treble with Man City and going on a 3-day bender and then going into England camp still hungover or whatever. Now, if you had a lot of rules around whatever, Jack Grealish would have been off the team. He would have been out of camp or whatever. But if you had standard of like, okay, how do we, and as Jack Grealish, says, like, no one, unless you're a professional footballer, you cannot understand the scrutiny and everything that we go through to get to this point. So yeah, I wanted to celebrate a historic achievement. Sorry that you don't like the way that I celebrate. I mean, we live in a world where your critics are one tweet away. And I think as a professional athlete, you have to be able to ignore that. Now, if Jack Grealish did that every weekend, it wouldn't be okay. Right. No. So this is the thing. Sorry, Jerry.
Sorry, I'm writing down everything you're saying. I'm learning so much here today. I don't think I should talk anymore. This is too good. I do have something to say though.
Go for it.
Look, raise your hand if you're listening to this, if you love to enforce rules. It's funny. I can't see any hands going up. We don't want to enforce. We don't want to be the enforcer. First of all, having rules is reactive to circumstances. Having standards, as John so eloquently puts it, having standards is proactive as opposed to reactive. It's I can deal with if you tell me what I can do to be better, but as soon as you tell me what not to do, my brain shuts down and I sort of rebel. But I think rules are important, and in my world, in my orbit, and raising 4 kids, and when I walk into a room of 47 athletes or 113 athletes, football team or whatever, I say, you know what? We only need one rule, and that one rule is to do the right thing. And that covers a myriad of things, so we don't have to think about it. So somebody goes out the night before and parties before a championship game. The coach can sit down and just say, help me understand why that's the right thing to do. So the responsibility and accountability gets put right back on the athlete. It's not you, the coach, enforcing some kind of a rule that you feel is not a good thing to do. So it's help me understand why this behavior really is the right thing to do. Well, of course, they can't come up with a reason. There's no way because they understand that. But anyway, so no one wants to enforce rules. So that's why this chapter is so important, because we're going to give you ways to implement setting standards, which I think is just brilliant. All right. One of my favorite chapters in there is the one on being selfless. And there's a great story that goes along with this. If you don't mind, Dan, I'd like to tell it. When Steve Kerr first took over in 2014 with the Golden State Warriors, he made a point, talk about relationships. And by the way, oh my gosh, I got so much going on in my mind right now. Relationships, positive, loving, caring relationships are the foundation of this book. By the way, let me just say this. That's the reason why the first concept, the first section of the book is called Connect. No connection, we're not going to be able to compete. We're not going to have any leadership. It's going to fall apart. So the foundational building block of not just the book, but of any culture is the relationship game. I asked a group of Hall of Fame coaches, 12 coaches, every one of them. I said, what was the most important game that you won going on to win that national or world championship? And every one of them said, without a doubt, in different words, but they all said it was the relationship game. So we're building the foundation here in this book by helping you to create a connective, caring environment. And one of the most important aspects to me is being selfless. And so when Steve became the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, he went out to establish relationships with all his players. And the one player that he particularly made an important impact on was Andre Iguodala. So he visits with Andre Iguodala. Now, for those of you who don't know Iggy, he started every game of his 15-year pro career. Every game. He was a 7-time All-Star. And Steve goes up to him and says, I really think your greatest contribution to this team is going to be coming off the bench. What? Are you kidding me? Me coming off the bench? Coach, what are you talking about? I'm not going to play for you. I'm a starter. Iggy said none of that. He looked at Steve in the eyes and he said, Coach, whatever it takes, I'm all in. That's my story on selflessness. And to me, too many athletes today, and of course, the media, the sponsors, they all play into this. It's all about what can I get? I've been on a committee of people who are analyzing a new recruit and trying to see if they're a good fit. Every one of these recruits in the beginning were saying, coming in, Coach, so how many minutes will I get? When will I be able to start? How much swag will I be getting? It's all about what can I get? If an athlete came in and said, Coach, I want to come here. What can I give to make this a better program? Oh my God, come on in. We want you right now. no words to be discussed about that. Now, selflessness is that wonderful quality of giving. It's the servant. Our purpose here in life. Many people listening might not agree, but at my age, I look back on my life and I see my total purpose and meaning in life is to serve and to give to others. And when I do, my life is filled with joy. When I'm not filled with joy, it's probably because I need to go out there and give to something to somebody, whatever it is, a good pep talk, a good something, a present of take them to lunch or whatever. So on it, what I've noticed with these 118 championship cultures is that every one of the teammates, well, not everyone, I take that back. There's been some cases where it wasn't everyone, but for the most part, the athletes were giving. They came to give. How can I make your game better? Kobe Bryant learned that after the first 6 or 7 years of his career, that giving to his teammates, making them better teammates, being selfless, giving up the ball, bringing out the best in others, made for championship teams. Michael Jordan, he was able to score 46 points a game when Phil Jackson came in to the organization. He sat down with Michael, had a relationship build session, and then said to him, if your goal is to win championships, then you have to score less points. And of course, Michael didn't understand that at the moment, but then he started to realize, oh, I see, coach. So I need to make my teammates around me better. And when I give to my teammates, they step up. The whole team steps up. We're going to win championships. And boom, 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 boom. 6 championships, one after the other. The only 2 championships in between they didn't win was Michael wasn't there to bring out the best in his teammates. So this is a really, really important point, this idea of selflessness. Not only you're going to read this to be a great teammate, but I just think in life, the more we give to each other, the better this world is.
Love it. I love it. Question to either of you to close our conversation around connection. Sum up the importance of connection for us, because I do wonder if it's still seen as a bit of a light and fluffy, and you're giving me some hard reasons as to why this is important, but it's potentially still seen as a slightly light and fluffy concept. So the importance of connection, other than what's been said already, and perhaps drawing from the book, why so important?
I mean, I just think about your life and the people you're connected to, right? So I have children, right? If I'm walking down the street and there's some complete stranger being picked on or getting beat up by a bunch of MMA fighters, am I necessarily jumping into that? I don't know. But if it's my kid, I'm flying in there, right? Because of that connection, because of that deep love, because of that bond. And I think this is what we talk about: is the deeper that bond, the deeper that connection. And I mean, I still have a WhatsApp group of all my college teammates. Right? That was 30 years ago, right? I have a text group of guys I went to kindergarten with, right? Like that is those sort of things. You drop anything and do anything for people like that, right? And the way that you are, the way that you be as that teammate is what makes people drop and do everything for you. One of my college teammates sadly recently passed away, 51 years old, sudden massive heart attack. And everyone was kind of just writing tributes to him about being hardworking, humility, making the most of what he had. What a great guy, right? And I always think about that. Like I say to teams, like if you're even on a high school team, right? Certainly if you're on a college team, look around this locker room. Sometime in your life, someone in this room is going to be asked to recommend you, hire you, right? Give you a reference, whatever it is. What are they going to say? The way you are right now is what they're going to say. And is it like, oh, Dan, yeah, that guy showed up early. He stayed late. He worked hard. What an amazing guy, treated people with respect, welcomes new people. Or, yeah, Dan was really kind of out for himself, right? Didn't really care about anyone, made people around him worse, right? like that's the type of person that you are in that moment. And this is like one of the big challenges in sport, is that some of the qualities that it takes that we see at very high levels in high achieving athletes, a little bit of narcissism, a little bit of ego, ruthlessness, all that, also don't necessarily always play well with others. And it's like, how do we find that balance? And I think, in a great team culture, you can have those things that drive you as an individual, but then also that selflessness to give back. And that's what, I think that's kind of Jerry and my, our connection through having firefighter dads. When you go to work every day and you depend on, that brotherhood of people, it was all men at that point, right, to keep you alive, right? If you're not looking out for them and they're not looking out for you, someone's going to die. And I think we were both raised in that kind of family. So this really resonates with both of us, that I might not like you, but I have to love and respect you and look out for you first.
Well said, John. I love that.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying there, both of you, and moving on to part 2, which is about competing, winning the competitive game. Again, let's draw some from some of these chapters. I don't know who's written what, but I mean, Jerry, should we start with you?
Yeah, start with me. This is kind of one of my most important ways of looking at sport, because I have a lot of people coming up. Oh, I wrote a book called The Competitive Buddha, and I've had some Buddhist, quote unquote, self-proclaimed Buddhist, come up and say, the Buddha competing? Yeah, the Buddha competes. That's right. In fact, he's our first student athlete ever. And what a competitor he was. He was an archer. He was a horseman. He wrestled. He was one of the best wrestlers during that time. But they say, well, it just seems like an oxymoron. Competitive Buddha. And so we wrote this chapter on competing, and people think, well, maybe how can you be a champion teammate yet compete with your teammates? It's because of the definition of competition. And what I do is I go back to the Latin root. John and I both went to Catholic schools, and John, I'm sure you studied Latin, and if not, then
I dropped out after a week. It was too much.
Okay, we got to teach you some Latin. Latin opened up my mind. I hated it when I did it, but boy, going back there with Latin, when I look at the word competition in Latin, the Latin root is compatire, and it means, listen to this, Dan, it means to seek together. OMG. It's like, what do you mean seek together? I'm against you, aren't I? No, you're not. In fact, if you go out for a run with me and we're going up a hill and you happen to feel really good that day, what you're going to do is you're going to challenge me to bring out the most that I have on that particular day. And vice versa. I go out and I'm feeling better one day. Competition on a team is, I'm going to push you on that pitch. I'm going to make you a better teammate, and I'm going to get in your face. I'm going to really, I'm going to be like defending you all over the place. Why? Because that's going to make you a better athlete and us a better team. So compatire, seeking together, is a process of understanding that competition is very positive. It's positive because I help you to become better while at the same time you're helping me to become better. So that needs to be understood. And once coaches get that and they pass it on to their athletes, now we have no problem showing up and making every practice like a national championship game. I've showed up at the University of North Carolina when Anson Durrance is having his practices. Of course, people should be familiar with his competitive cauldron. But behind that word competitive, we know what a cauldron is, but his look at competitiveness is, you play this practice like we're playing a national championship game and get in each other's face. At the end of practice, we'll all come together in a circle, put our arms around each other, look in each other's eyes and say, I'm so grateful for the fact that you pushed me. I'm so grateful for the fact that you got in my face. I feel like I'm so much more improved. And so I watched his practices, and honest to God, it was like they were playing for that national championship. So competition is an interesting term. If dealt with in that way, I think we bring out the best in each other.
You've made me think there, Jerry, of the broad and multi-dimensional nature of motivation, that sometimes in sport we can define motivation too narrowly, that it's outcome and performance, and actually we can be motivated in so many different ways, not least in the way that you're speaking to, which is, loving the competition from your opponent. You don't have to hate your opponent. You can love the quality, the standard of the play that your opponent brings to the table, because that pushes you, and that feels a bit more intrinsic, doesn't it? It feels more, it's the joy of competition and the joy of battle, and being joyful at the fact that your competition is really, really good, which I think for many people in sport feels an anathema. It feels very foreign, but actually it's a very powerful position to compete from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. John, I see you nodding. You're going to say something here. I want to hear it.
Well, being that we're on the sports psych show, I think one of the most often overlooked part of competition is being in the right mental state to compete your very best. And I mean, Dan, you being a former or current, but former professional golfer, right?
Yep.
We just had the U.S. Open.
Yep.
I don't know if you were watching it because it would have been on in the middle of the night for you, but it was here on the West Coast.
I don't quite have the stamina anymore for that, but I was tuned in for most of
it. But it was. I thought it was just an incredible event. For a first day where everyone was able to score, and then 3 days where you just held on for dear life. And I mean, when do you see the huge rough? I mean, you see professional golfers whiffing shots. I mean, it was like watching myself play half the time. And but when I think of Wyndham Clark, the guy who wins it, right? Like the person who you think, like when he wins and hits the winning putt, which is about 2 feet long, right? To win this tournament, the emotional release in that moment, he just burst into tears, right? And he screamed and he burst into tears and hugged his caddy and all his people and whatever. You don't think he felt fear? You don't think he was stressed? You don't think, he was totally activated emotionally and everything. Of course he was. It's just that people like him build the capacity to endure, right? You got a 2-foot putt, a 3-foot putt to win the U.S. Open, right? You've built the capacity to say, you know what, like this fear, this stress, this anxiety, everything that is happening right now, that's what I signed up for. These are the terms and conditions. And what I see is a lot of people saying, especially to young athletes, don't be nervous, don't be scared, don't be this, don't be that, which is, as you know, I see you smiling, right? It's the absolute worst thing you could say. If you're nervous, scared, stressed, it means that you care. It means that this means something to you. Congratulations. Welcome to the world. Like that, it's a great feeling, right? And so then you have to risk that. And one of my favorite golf stories of all time, I heard Paul McGinley tell this story, how when he was a young golfer and just turned pro, he actually roomed with Jack Nicklaus's son in college. And he got to meet Jack for dinner. And Jack said to him, let me just give you one piece of advice if you want to be a pro. Get used to losing. He goes, because I was the best golfer of all time, and I still lost 90% of the time. Or whatever.
Yep.
So get used to losing, right? And it's like sometimes we treat young athletes as loss is a catastrophe, loss is a failure. If you're scared, if you're stressed, if you're feeling all these things, and we turn them into negative things instead of saying they're just emotions, right? And build that capacity. And so as coaches, as teams, we have to create practice environments that help us build that capacity. And I think that's such an important thing that is way too often overlooked. And when it's overlooked and then we tell people the wrong thing, they just perform worse. So you want your teams to perform better, right? Create environments that build capacity.
Create environments that build capacity.
One of the ways that we help people who are reading this book to build that capacity is one of the sections in that book, aside from endurance, is to win the day. And several years ago, I wrote a book about 4 years ago called "Win the Day," and what that means is when you're standing on the green, and you've got a 2-foot. Everyone knows it's easier to make a 72-foot putt. We saw that in the tournament, right? Because there's nobody expecting you to win it, to drain it. But if you have a 2-foot putt, it's like OMG, we're like you could miss this putt, and if I miss it, how stupid will that look? And so you start getting tight, tense, and tentative. Only if you're trying to sink the putt. So what we do in this chapter on Win the Day is win the moment too. Is how do you win the moment? Well, it's focusing on all the things you can control, because you can't win the tournament and you can't control winning the tournament, but you can control how you approach that putt, your pre-shot routine, the breath that you take, the image that you have, the affirmation that you use, how you stroke the ball. I remember one time working with Vijay Singh, and he said, Jerry, he said, in order to make a putt, he said, what I've got to do is I've got to do everything right before the putt goes, before the ball goes. And he said he stands up next to the ball, he reads the green, he calculates all the stuff. These are all things you can control. He's not controlling whether the ball goes in or not. He's controlling that moment. He's winning the moment. And he takes a deep breath and he says something to himself. He had his own affirmation and he visualized the ball going on the path. And he said, once I stroke it, I stand back and I pray that it will go in. This is Vijay Singh. I mean, praying that it will go in. What should that tell all of us? It's whether I'm on the foul line at the front end of a 1-on-1 in a basketball championship scenario, or whether I'm coming down the home stretch of a track trying to win the 800-meter world championship. It doesn't matter. If we're focusing in on that outcome that we can't control, we're going to get tight, tense, and tentative. If we're focusing in on what we can control, we can win the moment. And when you win the moment, the outcomes are definitely in your favor. So this is one of the ways that our book, The Champion Teammate, can help all the guys, all the women on the team to focus in on what we can control so that we can win the day, win the moment, and win the game itself.
Well, I love it. And I once practiced alongside Vijay Singh, and I was just praying that I didn't look like an idiot as he was ripping the ball about 100 yards past me every single time. But he was one hell of a golfer.
Still is.
Still is. He got to world number one in his time, and did so while Tiger Woods was competing, which is incredible achievement in and of itself. Now, let's explore this last part 3, lead, winning the leadership game. Coming to either of you, there's plenty of golden nuggets, I'm sure, in this section. So tell us a little bit about leadership with relation to the champion teammate.
Well, I think, when we talk about leading, this is another one of those things, Dan, right? We always tell people be a better leader, but we don't teach them how. And I think once again, leadership is a way of being, or so people think that, leading means I just tell people what to do and then I stand back and don't do it myself. Right. Versus, modeling the behaviors that I want to see, being okay with conflict, being okay with disagreements, letting a team or coaching staff or whatever hash it out, and then accepting the agreement that we came to, even if it wasn't my idea or what I thought was the right thing. These are all components of leadership. And, for me, one of the chapters I wrote in there was one that I just think is a great story, and it's just called Pet the Dragon. Great leaders, great teams pet the dragons. And the idea behind it, there's a children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. And it's a story about a little kid who wakes up in the morning and there's a little cute dragon in his room and he pets it and it stays small and cute. And then as he goes throughout his day and his mom and his dad keep saying there's no such thing as dragons, and every time they say that, the dragon gets bigger and bigger and eventually takes over their house and runs away with the house and all this until they acknowledge its existence. And then it gets small and cute again. Right. And in this little children's book is this life lesson, right? That when every team, every locker room has issues, and you have to have the courage to confront them when they're small and cute and address them, because if you don't, they get bigger and bigger and they'll eventually take over your locker room. And I feel like, from in my own standpoint, when I work with teams, this is maybe some of the most important work that I do, is understanding from the coach what are the dragons in the room, and then dragging that out of the athletes so that they will acknowledge that it exists, that they will address it, they will have the difficult conversation, they will shed tears, and then at the end they give each other a hug and stand in a circle and say, okay, now we grow, now and we've just grown from this. And so many coaches don't want to confront that moment, and all the athletes know it's there and they don't want to confront it, and they go in there, and then you get cliques of people who fall on this side and people who fall on that side. And so it's funny, like one of the things that I do is when I work with these teams, I'll sometimes I'll just read them the little kids book and we'll talk about it, and then I'll buy them a little stuffed dragon and it sits in the locker room, and a kid will come up to the front of the room and pet the dragon and be like, we need to have a chat here today before we go out to practice. And I just think it's a great analogy and a great thing, to think that you're going to have a high achieving team without conflicts, without problems, like you're living in a fantasy land, right? So it's going to happen, and great teams acknowledge them and move on and have that respect and love and connection that, you know what, Dan, you and I might not get along, but for the good of the team, we're going to figure it out. Right. Versus we're going to just keep hating each other, and I'm going to get as many people to support me and you're going to get as many people to support you. Next thing you know, your locker room's broken. And, unless you have all the talent in the world, you're not going to win anything with a broken locker room. And even if you have all the talent in the world, you might not win anything with a broken locker room.
That's right. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm.
Well said. And Jerry, 40 years of experience, you must have worked on so many leadership processes or practices, and so you will have so much experience in this domain. I mean, this final part 3, leading, winning the leadership game. Finish the podcast here with some advice for us, lifted from your new book, The Champion Teammate.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dan, for having confidence in me like that. Lifting the podcast here is quite a challenge for me. But, I told John this, and then I proceeded to write a story about it. And I'll tell my audience anytime, everything that I learned about leadership that sticks to the wall, that remains my go-to principle and advice, came at the age of 12, when I was 12 years old. And then I went out and tried leadership. I taught high school. I coached basketball. I was a naval officer during the Vietnam era. I went to graduate school and taught students when I was a teacher at Penn State and Stanford and other places. But I'll tell you, 12 years old, I didn't need to really learn more because everything reinforced that. And that one principle came because being the luckiest kid in my neighborhood, my dad was as John alluded to, my dad was a New York City firefighter. He was a leader. He was a battalion chief. And I was the luckiest kid because one day a week, I got to go to the firehouse during the summer and watch my father work and slide down the fire pole and touching a fire engine. Have you ever touched a fire engine? It has about 4 coats of paint on it, and it's made out of steel. Like you can't crash into it and have anything happen to it. I mean, it's just like this unbelievable monstrosity. It's like, it really makes a statement. And I was totally overwhelmed by all of it. One day I go to a fire, many days, in the back of the chief's car. Sirens blasting, lights flashing, people watching. I'm right in the middle of it. And then I proceed to watch my father jump out of the chief's car. All these officers, captains and lieutenants lower than him, were standing around shouting orders. Get that hose, take it in there, put that fire over here, get this. And he jumps out and he says, hey, give me that hose. He takes the hose, follow me, runs into the building, up the stairs with the men behind him, showing them what to do by example. Later he comes out and he's standing there when everything is calmed down. And he's standing around and the firemen are coming out. And there's my dad going over, tapping their shoulders, patting them on the butt, getting them into a circle, which is a symbol that John and I admire. And he gets all the firefighters together and says, you guys were awesome today. Let's get back and get some lunch. And we go back and sit around the table, and the firemen, you could just see, they just idolized him. You know, he was a hero. And why was he a hero? Because he had the relationship game down. He knew how to make people feel important. He knew how to make people feel valued. He empowered his men. He led by example. And all of that is all the stuff and beyond that you could learn going to graduate school or doing anything you want in life, trying to learn about leadership. So we have the chapter, and it's called Carry the Hose. And I reach out to everyone listening and saying, in what ways can you as a coach carry the hose? You know, maybe there's some stuff that needs to be done and you're waiting for the teammates to do it, that your athletes. Well, maybe you should start doing it, you know, as yourself and let them follow. As Mahatma Gandhi once said, be the change you want to see. And that was my father. And he was not an educated man. I mean, he didn't go beyond elementary school. Seriously, he never went to high school. But he had this innate sense about what leadership was all about. He could have written a book about it. And I was exposed to that at the age of 12. And between 12 and now, I'm like 42. I forget what I am. But whatever it is, I know that at this point in life, I have not really learned that much more than I learned at the age of 12. So we write about that in this book. And that's my contribution for ending this podcast.
Well, absolutely brilliant. Certainly the energy of a 42-year-old, if not still the energy of a 12-year-old, Jerry. So, fantastic. Brilliant. That was absolutely fascinating. Everything that I thought it would be. Your book is The Champion Teammate. You've neatly given us some highlights from the book, but I know that having made my way through it, there's so much fantastic material in there, as I said, techniques, tools, stories, anecdotes, philosophies that we can all learn from and utilize every single day on and off the course, the court, the pitch. So just brilliant stuff, both of you. Let's round things off by just asking where people can find you, follow you, and just as importantly, find and purchase the book. John, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so the book right now is exclusively on Amazon, probably till the end of the summer, because it's in a hardcover edition. Once the softcover comes out, it'll be at Barnes & Noble and all the other places. Or, you know, if people just contact me directly, John at changingthegameproject.com, we do really discounted bulk orders to help people out. Changingthegameproject.com is the mothership for all I do. And, as we talked about, the Way of Champions podcast, Dan, that you've been on is, I think episode 330 is coming out this week. And, that's been pretty, quite the journey to get all that out week after week for many, many years. So that's the best place to find me, and I'll let Jerry speak for, himself.
Well, you could find me up on any wonderful trail in the morning in the redwoods between 6:30 and 8. But since you probably won't be there, how about wayofchampions@gmail.com, which is my email address, and I'm open to getting words of wisdom from you all and learning further. And my website is wayofchampions.com. One word with an S, wayofchampions.com. And John and I just want to add this, Dan. Maybe John doesn't fully agree with me on this, but I always say, you know, we're we're not trying to make money. We're trying to make a difference. And of course, we want to make money. It takes care of our children, our family, and allows us to keep writing and keep speaking and keep teaching. But this book will, without a doubt in my mind, I'm proud to say this book will make a difference in your life as a coach or as an athlete or as a mom and a dad. Life, as John said, is filled with being part of teams. Throughout your life, you'll be part of many teams, and figure out what team you want to be part of and be the best teammate you can be to maximize your chances of being the best version of yourself.
And Dan, I want to give one last little tidbit, if you don't mind. We told the story of hashing out the first conference. Well, coming up here in August is our first live Way of Champions conference since before the pandemic. So since 2019, that's August 4th, 5th, and 6th. It's in Denver, but we also have a live stream option this year. So we have Phil Jackson teaching, we have Steve Kerr teaching, we have Cindy Timshel teaching, Jerry and I, and some amazing coaches in the room as well. So, I know a lot of your listeners are obviously in the UK. They can live stream it. But for people who are interested, right, it's in Denver, just over a month away, and we're super excited for it here. So they can just go to my website and just on the main menu, just at changingthegameproject.com, just click on Way of Champions Conference if they want more info there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, both. That's been awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Site Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.